Chapter 14. Have you set up a specific point in the park to meet, or just told them the park? Steve asked from the middle seat of Matt's SUV. He'd offered JV the front seat, and she'd taken it. Neither. I told them we'd be meeting somewhere public, but I didn't tell them exactly where. I didn't want them to have a chance to post people there, before you could determine exactly what you wanted to do. Who did you tell which park? JV asked. Just my con and you guys today, of course. Okay, you said it's a good size. Steve sounded satisfied by that news. Yeah, over 150 acres. Is there a way we can get an idea of what the different areas are? Steve asked. Yeah, no problem. I can cruise the streets that surround it, drive around the whole thing so you can get an idea of what's where. Matt glanced at the other man in the rear view mirror. That works? So, I assume they came into town today, like we did. JV said from beside him. Probably a safe assumption. They were in contact with my con for permission to come. I didn't deal with them on that. Only on the terms of the meeting. How will they find out the details on location? Rebecca's mother is supposed to call me at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, to get the exact time and place. JV nodded slowly and narrowed her eyes. Matt knew that look. She was deep in thought, likely considering possibilities. Turning his attention back to the road, he drove the few miles between his place and the park. Okay, here we are. I'll drive around the whole thing, then you can tell me what parts you want to see in more detail. It took them a few minutes to drive around the entire park, then he pulled in the parking area on the north end, and turned to look at his passengers. What do you want to see again? There was a gazebo. Can we go over there again? I'd like to take a closer look at that, JV said. No problem. In the end, they looked at a half-dozen different spots in the park, pointing out the pros and cons of each one. One had no seating, and not knowing how long they would be there, they couldn't expect Rebecca to stand the whole time, possibly for several hours. Another was too far from the bathrooms. Matt understood that one. Before Connie had died, she'd complained about having to pee every 5 minutes. One had too many people around, another not enough. There was no perfect place, but after some investigation and more discussion they settled on where the meet would take place. That done, they stopped at a grocery store where JV bought enough food to feed a small army for a month-long siege, then they went back to his condo. Rebecca and Alex were awake when they got back. The three women sorted through bags, put things away, and laid out the ready-to-eat things for dinner, as the men brought in the groceries. In less than 15 minutes, everything was dealt with, and they were fixing plates. Matt noticed that Nick made sure Rebecca got a plate first, and had a place at the table. His table wasn't as big as the one that sat in their house, but he didn't usually have as many people around as they did. He waited until everyone else had food before fixing his plate, then he joined Steve and Bobby in leaning against the counter or wall to eat. By unspoken agreement, Nick was the only man at the table, sitting beside Rebecca. It had happened that way for 2 reasons. First, he was the highest-ranking man in the room. Second, because he was making sure Rebecca got enough to eat. As soon as she finished one plate, Nick left his food and made her another. Did you figure out where the meat will go down? Bobby asked between bites of fried chicken and mashed potatoes. We did, Steve answered the same way. It's not ideal, but we can make it work. We'll sit down and discuss it after dinner. Are you excited to see your family? Alex asked Rebecca, obviously trying to move the subject to something a little happier. How long has it been? 3 years? Closer to 4. I tried moving around and hiding in human form before I decided the only way to stay hidden was to leave no trail, and I spent about 6 months running as a cat. Wow. Alex seemed stunned as shook her head slowly. I can't imagine spending that long as a cat, or having to hide from everyone I know. She covered one of Rebecca's hands with one of hers. But I'm glad you had the strength to do it, or we wouldn't have you. You've done so much for us, you've loved us all. Rebecca gave the younger girl a gentle, motherly smile. I'm glad I did too. I do love you all, and I wouldn't trade my life now for anything. Her gaze shifted to her mates. Matt saw how much she loved him. An ache started deep in his heart. Connie had sometimes had a similar look when she looked at him. He was sure he'd had one for her as well, and he realized now how much he missed that. He missed the companionship, the feeling that you were never alone, no matter what you faced. There was always someone right there beside you. As much as losing the baby alone would have hurt, losing Connie had hurt so much more because he had had to deal with the loss of them both all by himself. I'm not sure if excited is the right word though. Rebecca took a deep breath and pushed food around on her plate. Nervous is a good word though. Alex frowned and Matt noticed her fork slipping from her grip. It didn't fall, but went just far enough to dangle useless from her fingers. Why nervous? She seemed genuinely confused. Matt could see both sides. Alex had probably never had a really serious disagreement with her folks, and she'd certainly never been estranged from them like Rebecca had. At the same time, while he'd never been estranged from his family like she had, he could see how Rebecca would be nervous. She had no clue how her family would behave, how they would treat her. As far as she knew, they had no clue she was pregnant. Come to think of it, Matt hadn't told them, so they may not know. I'm not sure I can explain it. Rebecca dropped her fork onto her plate and pushed it away. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands together on top of her belly. It's complicated. Alex looked like she wanted to say something, but a look from Nick stopped her. Have you had enough to eat? Nick turned back to his mate, concern evident in his voice. Would you like something else? I'm good for now. She shifted in the seat, as if uncomfortable. All right. Why don't we move this into the other room? That chair's hard. No, not yet. She pushed herself to her feet. I'm going to help pick this stuff up. You don't have to do that, JV said. Alex and I can handle it. Rebecca frowned at her as she waddled to the counter and started closing containers. I'm not crippled or hurt. I don't want people waiting on me. I can help. She stacked the closed containers on one edge of the counter and dropped the dirty utensils in the sink. I'll put the food in the fridge. Alex jumped up and rushed over to take the containers off the counter before Rebecca could. Don't even think about doing those dishes, Steve said. I'll take care of them if no one else does. You go sit down and rest. As much as you hate to admit it, today has been exhausting. He gave her a mock scowl. I know you're independent and stubborn, but save your energy for tomorrow. Let us take care of you for now. Rebecca scowled at him before looking at JV, and then Nick. After a moment, she shuffled toward the living room muttering to herself. Matt caught the words helpless and overprotective as she eased herself down to sit on one end of the sofa. He couldn't help the half-smile he felt forming on his lips. You've got your hands full there, don't you? He looked across the table at Nick. I do. Nick grinned. And I wouldn't have it any other way. You know if that little one's a boy or a girl yet? She says we're not finding out. She says. Matt lifted one brow at Nick. I left it up to her. He shrugged one shoulder. Finding out one way or the other didn't mean that much to me. As long as she and the baby are healthy, I'm good. She said she wanted it to be a surprise, so we're waiting. You are so whipped. Matt grinned. But I understand. They cleaned up the kitchen and joined the couple in the living room to discuss plans for the next day. When they were done discussing the events for the following day, Rebecca and Nick said goodnight and went to bed, with Steve and JV not far behind. Matt had made sure to get the extra bedding from the tops of both closets when he changed into the sweatpants and t-shirt he used as pajamas, before the couples had retired for the night. Now they were piled on a pair of dining room chairs that had been moved into the living room for extra seating. Well, who's sleeping where? Bobby asked with a surprisingly large yawn. I'll take the floor, Matt said. It's between the two of you to decide between the sofa and the recliner. I'll take the recliner so you can have the couch, Alex said to Bobby. I'm smaller and can sleep almost anywhere. The couch is long enough for you to stretch out. I don't need that much space. I was gonna let you have it, but if you say so, I won't argue. He grabbed a pillow from one of the chairs and a blanket from another, and moved to make his bed. I'm not telling you we have to go to bed now, Matt said. Just making sure you have what you need when you're ready. He glanced around to see if there was anything he'd forgotten. Let me know if you need anything. I'm going to step out back for a few minutes. Going through the kitchen, he stepped through the sliding glass door leading to the small yard. As soon as the door clinked shut, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The scents and sounds of his tiny sanctuary washed over his senses, and immediately started to relax him. He'd taken off his shoes when he'd changed before his sister had gone to bed, blocking access to his clothes. He walked out into the soft, damp grass. He kept moving until he stood in the middle of the small space and was able to block out the sounds of the city by focusing on the sweet whisper of wind through tree branches, the tiny click of bugs calling to their mates, the light trills of birds settling into their nests for the night. The sound of the door sliding open drew him back to the here and now, but he didn't move. Instead, he listened to the light footsteps on cement as the scent of fresh-cut grass eased into his mind. Since the scent hadn't been there seconds ago, he knew it was Alex who'd stepped out the door. This is a lovely yard. Her voice was soft and uncertain. Thank you. It took some work to get it like this, but I spent a good amount of time out here, so it was worth it. It's an amazing haven from the city that surrounds us. Her voice was closer, and the whisper of her shoes on the grass told him she was approaching. Why does it feel like you've been avoiding me? She dropped her voice to little more than a whisper. Matt let his head fall forward. He knew he would have to deal with this eventually, but he'd hoped it wouldn't be yet. Because I have been. He knew better than to lie. For all he knew, she'd be able to scent it, then he'd have hurt her feelings and offended her. Not something he wanted to do if there was any hope of some kind of relationship between them, should he figure out how to get past his own issues. Can I ask why? Her voice was thin with hurt. Matt took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I assume you feel it too? The mating instinct? He opened his eyes and looked down at his feet. I do, but I wasn't sure you did too until now. She put one hand on his arm. Matt turned to face her. This is going to sound trite and made up, but it's not you. It's me. Her mouth fell open and her brow furrowed with hurt. A pang of guilt shot through him. No, I really mean that. He covered her hand on his arm with his. Come sit down and I'll try to explain. He led her to the shallow cement porch, sat her in one of the rockers, and took the other for himself. About 6 years ago I met Connie. Before I knew it, I was head over heels in love with her. There was no going back for me. Within a year we were married. You're mated already? Alex's voice trembled. That may be part of it. Matt took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She was human, and even though I never felt the instinct for her that I feel for you, it didn't matter. She was my everything. Was. I'm getting to that. He paused. This was harder than he'd thought it would be. We were happy, we had it all, except the family we wanted to build. Then 3 years ago she got pregnant. He heard her breath catch. She was about as far along as Rebecca is now, when the accident happened. Accident. She was on her way back from seeing a client in Vail. A drunk driver crossed the center line on one of the mountain roads and hit her head-on. She never saw it coming. Oh no. Alex's hands flew up to cover her mouth and her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. She was killed instantly, as was our son. Matt looked down at his lap where his fists lay. The ache had lightened some over the years, but his anger still burned inside him. Oh my God, Matt. I can't imagine. She reached over and put one hand on his arm again. He looked up and caught her eye. So, you see? It's not you. I'm just getting my life back in order, and I'm just not sure if I can handle another relationship. The possibility of another loss. The guilt. Oh, Matt, her mouth tilted downward and the tears spilled down her face without a sound. I'm so sorry. Her lower lip quivered. I've lost some people in my life, but to lose your wife and baby. I can't imagine how horrible that must have been.